thankful to be able to speak to you this morning, but I feel, man, maybe we've done everything we need to do with the songs that we've sung and the prayers that we prayed. I got chill bumps staring at it as well, my soul. And I think the thing that made it so is we've got basically a building full of people at various stages of life, facing different circumstances, challenges, problems, issues, some of which we know about as a group and others of which you may be holding on to yourself and I have no idea what you're dealing with. And you are singing about glorifying God and saying, it is well with my soul. Even in anticipation of the day when the Lord returns, you say, even so it is well. What a blessing to be together with a group of people who are able to sing like that. This morning, I want to consider with you a lesson that I hope will be of special use to maybe some of our young folks, but I want it to resonate with all of us. And I'm taking it from Ecclesiastes chapter 12 and verse 1, where Solomon in the book of Ecclesiastes says, remember also your Creator in the days of your youth. Remember your Creator. Now, what does he mean by the word remember? I don't think it's just like it came to my mind. Or when my alarm goes off on Tuesday night, I remember to take the garbage out. That's the only way I remember is the alarm that goes off. I wouldn't remember or the Lydia alarm. One or the other is going to remember. But it's not just an intellectual remembering. It is a remembering with a commitment, and that being the center of our attention, and it being really the thing that frames our whole lives. Let me give you an example of a place where this word remember is used that I think gets to the sense of the word here in Ecclesiastes 12. In Psalm 137, this is a psalm of one who has been taken captive by the Babylonians. And he is in sorrow because the Babylonian captors are mocking them and deriding them. And they say in verse 3, sing for us one of the songs of Zion. And here's what one of the captives of Jerusalem says. How can we sing a song of Yahweh in a foreign land? You hear the heartbrokenness in that, don't you? O Jerusalem, if I forget you, may my right hand forget her skill. May my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth, if I do not remember you. If I do not exalt Jerusalem above my chief joy. Now, how is this person remembering Jerusalem? It's not oh yeah, I remember living there. It is something that is shaping his identity and his memory and his commitments and his love. And you can see it even there, if I do not exalt Jerusalem above my chief joy. I think the idea of remembering here is paralleled with exalting in it as my chief joy. When this word remember is used here in Ecclesiastes chapter 12, it's not just an intellectual reminder, it is exalting your Creator as your chief joy, making that the center of your attention. This word remember is used all the way back in the beginning of the book of Genesis, starting with Genesis chapter 8. And I think these are the very first times that the word remember is used in the scriptures. And if you will remember, in Genesis chapter 8 and verse 1, this is when Noah is in the ark, and the text tells us, then God remembered Noah. Now, does that mean that for this period of time when it was raining and the floods were sitting on the waters, that God lost track of things and then was like, oh yeah, I forgot about Noah? That's not the situation. What it's saying, remembering here, is God was concerned and focused and kept his word. That's what it means that he remembered. You see that down in verse 15 of chapter 9, in the same context, chapter 9 and verse 15. He says, and I will remember my covenant, which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh. Brother Tom Holly, I don't know if you've ever heard him say this, but he has this saying where he'll say every covenant, every agreement that God makes is made with a promise and kept by memory. Made with a promise and kept by memory. God remembering is not just him being reminded in some kind of intellectual way, but of him being committed and devoting himself to the promise that he made. So when Solomon tells us in Ecclesiastes chapter 12 and verse 1 to remember your Creator, he is saying, make him the center. Make him the thing that directs your life. Remember the covenant that you have made and the promises that you're supposed to keep. I think we get that indication in Ecclesiastes chapter 12. In verse 13, he says, the conclusion. After writing 12 chapters of the book of Ecclesiastes, Solomon says, the conclusion, when all has been heard, is fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole of man. For God will bring every work into judgment and every secret thing, whether it is good or whether it is evil. You hear what he's saying there? What it means to remember your Creator is to always keep in mind that your whole person is consumed with your Creator, that he is the focus. Now, why would we say that he is the thing that should get all of our focus? It's because, as he says there, he is our Creator. In Psalm 100 and verse 3, the psalmist says, know that the Lord, he is God. It is he who made us and not we ourselves. We are his people and the sheep of his pasture. It would be foolish for us to orient our lives. This is what the whole book of Ecclesiastes is about. It would be foolish for us to orient, to build our lives around anything else, because he is our Creator. We are his creation. He is the shepherd. We're just the sheep of his pasture. And so he says, remember your Creator. But I want to focus on that idea there that he mentions, remember your Creator in the days of your youth. I want to drop back to chapter 11 of Ecclesiastes and verse 9. Notice he says there, rejoice, or depending on your text, it might say, be glad, young man, during your childhood or in the days of your youth, and let your heart be merry during the days of young manhood, and walk in the ways of your heart and in the sight of your eyes. We're going to notice the rest of that verse in just a second, but I want you to see what he says there. Rejoice in your youth. Rejoice in your young age. I think about the students that we have who just started school this week. And I want you to hear the words of Solomon here, to find joy in your youth. Or maybe you're in your young days and you just finished high school and you're starting some new path, whether it's work or college. Maybe you're building those relationships. Rejoice in those days. When you're in your youth, and I think the Hebrew idea for youth would extend a lot further than maybe we think. I take it to be that when Paul writes to Timothy about his youth in 1st and 2nd Timothy, Timothy's probably in his early 40s. All right, so that doesn't get all of you in youth, right? But it gets a lot of us more than we might would have thought. All right, so he's talking about your youth there, and he says, you take it, this preacher here in Ecclesiastes 11, he's saying, rejoice in those days. Be merry during those days. Walk in the ways of your heart and the sights of your eyes. I think he's saying, do the things that you enjoy. Follow the paths that are satisfying to you. You have health and you have energy and you have opportunity and you are building relationships and you are able to have fun in ways that you cannot do for much longer. Not for a long time anyway. I think that what we need to see from the book of Ecclesiastes is that chapter 12, verse 1, remembering our Creator in the days of our youth and being able to find joy in our youth go hand in hand. That is, remembering our Creator is the thing that makes life meaningful and the way we find true joy. Because as Solomon will say in the book of Ecclesiastes, the great danger that we face in our youth is building our lives on something else, anticipating finding joy there. I know where you are if you're a young person and you have all of those opportunities before you. I still talk to Lydia all the time about what I wish I could do when I grew up. You know, Sometimes I want to be a meteorologist because I think it's so cool. And then sometimes I see animals, I think I'd be a veterinarian. And she says, Larsen, you would have been awful at both of those things. Like, she's right about that. Like, I don't even love animals. I just think it would be cool to, anyway, so beside the point. But right now, you have so many options in front of you, right? If you're not married, you have options in front of you. If you've not gone to college, you have options. If you've not started your full-time career job, you've got options. There's so many things that lay before you. And what Solomon tells us all the way back in Ecclesiastes chapter 2 is he says, I thought I would try to center my life on one of those things and see which one really gave me meaning to my life, which one really gave me purpose. And he said, so I pursued wisdom. I pursued education and learning. And that was vanity. And I pursued works. I thought I'd build great buildings and I would build great structures. He says, I pursued women. I thought that would be the thing. He says, I pursued wine and on and on. He says, I did all of these different things. I pursued wealth. And all of it was vain. Because one day, you and I and we are going to die. And then whose will those things be? What will be the value of wisdom? What will be the value of wealth? What will be the value of women? What will be the value of wine? What will be the value of your works when you're dead? Not much. The temptation is to try to find joy by centering on something else. So I'm looking at some of you, and I know that as you go through your high school and through your college or your early working years, you're making those decisions about what your life is going to be about. And the way you make those decisions is by the kind of job that you're choosing, and by the kind of person that you're going to date and marry, and by the kind of decisions that you're making right now. You are choosing what your life is going to look like. Enjoy it. Love it. Find the ways that bring merriness to your life. Rejoice in the days of your youth. But I want you to consider that judgment is coming. Remember that judgment is coming. And not only that, but look back at chapter 11 again, 11 and verse 10. Look at the end of verse 9. He says, rejoice in the days of your youth. The very end of verse 9, yet know that God will bring you to judgment for all these things. So remove vexation from your heart and put away evil from your flesh, because childhood and the prime of life are vanity. When Solomon says that childhood and the prime of life are vanity, I don't think he's saying there's no value in them. He's just said, rejoice in them. And he is just saying in chapter 12, verse 1, to remember your Creator in those days. I think he's saying they're passing away. They're here for a while, and then they're gone. And that's the idea of vanity. It's not that there's no usefulness to human wisdom. It's not that there's no usefulness to human works or even wealth, but they are vanity. And if you try to build on them, they're going to pass away very quickly. And as you will see, he will describe what's happening in the coming days, because what's going to happen is there's going to be decline and there's going to be weakening. And we'll talk more about that in a second. But let me tell you that you need to remember that God is coming in judgment, because sin in your youth can bear bitter fruit later in life. In verse 10, remove vexation from your heart and put away evil from your flesh, because childhood and the prime of life are vanity. I don't know how many you young people know, but I know people who are close to me who right now, just in their 30s, are living hard, difficult lives because of choices that they made when they were 19 or 20 or 21. And they're not facing the judgment of God yet, but they are living lives of vexation and pain that they regret and are sorry about, because they work hard now and can't make up for the decisions that they made not too long ago. So find joy now, but frame that joy with an awareness of who God is and with a reminder that God is going to bring every work into judgment. He's going to bring judgment for all of these things, and that our whole purpose is to fear God and keep His commandments. I think that one of the great challenges of teenage years is this approach that sometimes parents take and say, well, boys will be boys. We just need to let them sow their wild oats. And what they mean by that is let them experience what it's like to be a young person with not much restraint on it. Now, I will tell you this. I think there are times where it is appropriate for young folks to do some sowing and then have to do some reaping. I think that's right. But I think the challenge is when we let them do their sowing and we protect them from the reaping. And what I think we need to understand is that if we will let them sow and reap the consequences when they are young, then they will learn the lesson that a man, whatever he sows, that will he also reap. And even then, I would say maybe a 15 or 16 or 17 or 18 is not old enough to be doing the sowing that we think he should be doing, and needs to be protected and guarded from even going down that route until he can learn the lessons of sowing and reaping. Because the text of Galatians 6 says that from the one who sows to his own flesh will from the flesh reap corruption, and the one who sows to the Spirit will reap from the Spirit eternal life. And let us not lose heart in doing good, for in due time we will reap if we do not grow weary. The problem is that sowing your wild oats, you reap the consequences of wild oats. And when you let boys be boys, then sometimes those boys don't develop into the men that we would want them to be. As parents, we don't need to diminish or minimize what our children's behavior means in the long run. I think sometimes boys, as they are, do things and we cheapen it. And we say, that doesn't mean very much because they're just a teenager. Yes, they are. But let me tell you, young men and young ladies, that who you are is who you are becoming. William Wordsworth, a writer, said, the child is father to the man. Or maybe we would say the child is mother to the woman. And what he meant by that was that the choices and decisions that you're making today are having as much of an effect on what your life is going to be as anybody else's choices, more so, for sure. And there are special challenges that come with youth. So Paul writes to Timothy in 2 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 22. And I don't know all of the special circumstances that Timothy was having to face, but he says, flee from youthful lusts. I take this to be at the end of Paul's life, right? So we're talking about the mid-60s. And he's had Timothy with him probably since the mid-40s, mid to late 40s. So Timothy is at least, Timothy goes with him probably as a late teenager or early 20s. So he's at least in his 40s here. And he's still being told, flee from youthful lusts. Run away from them. Flee them. And pursue righteousness, faith, love, and peace with those who call on the Lord from a pure heart. So I'm looking at Landon, I'm looking at Cade, looking at Jake as some of our younger men. And I want to know, what are you running away from and what are you chasing? What are you pursuing? What are you running after? Are you running after righteousness? Are you running after love and faith and peace with those who call on the name of the Lord? Or are you running after something else? Are you chasing something else? And of course, we could include every one of us in that list. Let me use this as an illustration. Don't use your youth as an excuse for not serving the Lord. I don't know exactly how old all of our young people are, but don't use your youth as an excuse for not serving the Lord. Don't say, I'll get around to that, or it'll come around, or one of these days, or when I get settled down, or something like that. Don't use that. So in 2 Chronicles chapter 34, 2 Chronicles 34 and verse 3, Brother Lonnie talked about King Josiah the other day, and I think, Lydia did, and certainly pointed out this, knowing that we were thinking about this lesson. I was thinking about preparing it, and she pointed this out. So do you remember how old Josiah was when he takes the throne? He's 8. He's 8 years old. Now, I take it to be that he's probably not in a lot of direct control when he's 8 years old. There are probably advisors and helpers there telling him what to do. But I want you to see in verse 3, now in the 8th year of his reign. All right, let's do some mathing, right? 8 years old, he's reigned for 8 years, he's 16. In the 8th year of his reign, your text may say, while he was still a youth. I think the ESV may say, while he was still a boy, right? So 16 and still a boy. That's right. That's right. But notice this. While he was still a youth, while he was still a boy, he began to seek the God of his father David. And in the 12th year, so now he's 18, he began to, he's 20, not 18. I'm a history teacher. He began to cleanse Judah and Jerusalem of the high places, the Asherim, and the graven images and the molten images. I want you to think about that. Between the ages of 16 and 20, he begins to seek the Lord, and then he goes on the attack and starts ripping down idols and places of false worship. And he even goes to tear down the altars of the Baals and the incense altars and the graven images and the molten images. Look at this guy. Josiah is 16 years old when he starts to seek the Lord, and he's 20 when he goes on the offensive. Don't use your youth as an excuse not to be involved in the Lord's work right now. There's no sense in it. If you've got your brains and your strength and your energy and your health, get after it and don't wait. In chapter 34, dropping down to verse 8, now in the 18th year of his reign, he's still only 26. As I look back at 26, that's such a young age. He looks back. Then he cleansed the land and the house, and he sent Shaphan the son of Azaliah and Maaseiah, the official of the city, and Joah the son of Jehoahaz, the recorder, to repair the house of the Lord his God. From 16 to 20 to 26, do you see his dedication to the work of the Lord? And you say, well, I'm not the king of Israel. No, you're not. But you have so many opportunities to do good right now. You have so many opportunities to serve the Lord. And I want you to take hold of those. Think about examples from the scriptures. Think about Daniel, who is sold into captivity. Not sold in captivity. He is in captivity. He's taken in captivity. And in Daniel chapter 1, he said, the text says that he had set his heart that he would not defile himself with the king's food. He had set his heart. He had made that decision. Now, we see a young man, Daniel, in Daniel chapter 1, probably in his mid-teens, maybe. And it's an old man that faces the lion's den in Daniel chapter 6, in his 80s probably. How do you build the courage to be an old man to get thrown into a lion's den? I think you do it by setting your heart not to defile yourself with the king's food when you're a middle teenager. And you build on that for decade after decade after decade, because you are who you are becoming. Think about Joseph and the great danger that Joseph faced in Genesis 37 when he's sold into captivity, into slavery, into Egypt. And he's in the house of Potiphar, and Potiphar's wife says, "Come lie with me." And what is his answer? How can I do this great wickedness and sin against my God? I hope our young folks in their youth, Joseph's probably 17 or 18 at the time, I hope you in your youth have the capacity to say, how can I do this great wickedness and sin against my God? You know, you can take on great service right now. I believe that our culture has made us delay when it's okay for our boys and girls to grow up. I think they have made it where you've got to be in your 30s or your 40s to be able to take real responsibility. That's not right. That's not true. In Acts chapter 16, Paul goes and picks up a young man named Timothy. Timothy did not have a good father role model in his house, but he had a good mother and a good grandmother, Eunice and Lois. And all of the brethren, all of the brothers and sisters are speaking well of Timothy, and Paul says, I want him with me. Now, think about the fact that Timothy is probably in his late teens, maybe early 20s when Paul picks him up in Acts chapter 16. And he goes with Paul. First of all, Paul says, you've got to be circumcised, right? And I don't know about you, but that's a pretty heavy commitment to have to make to be a follower of Jesus. And he does it. You don't have to be circumcised. You are not. I do not know. Do not care. But my point is that Timothy was committed to do whatever it took in order to be help the gospel cause. And in 1 Thessalonians 3, I want you to think about what's happening here. This is the first missionary journey Timothy's ever been on. He is a young man, a really young man, because he's still a young man 20 years later when Paul writes his letters to him. So he's a really young man, and they just left Thessalonica, where Paul has to leave because they wanted to kill him, and they wanted to kill the people who were preaching the gospel in Thessalonica. So Paul is in Athens. Timothy comes and gives the report, and Paul says, I need you to go back. He sends Timothy back to Thessalonica in the middle of all of that. He's a young man, and Paul trusted him. I love the fact that in 1 Corinthians, written just a few years after the Thessalonian letters, Paul says, I'm going to send to you Timothy because there's nobody else that I can send who is going to have the same concern for you that I have for you that Timothy does. He said he will teach you everything just like I teach them. I would love for my sons, I would love for the young men here where I could say, there's somebody I'm worried about, and you could go see them, and it would be like sending myself. Not that that's that great of a thing, but to have that capacity as a young man. The reality is there will come a day where you cannot be as active in the service as you would like to be. Whether that's the responsibilities that are mounting on you, or whether that's your health and difficulties that you face. I think young people often think, I will get to that down the road. I will be that when I get older. I will take care of that someday. But now is the time when you have the energy and the capacity and the health and the opportunity to do so much. It will not remain forever. It will not even remain until you die. It will fade more quickly than that. That's what all of Ecclesiastes 12, for the most part, is about. About when you get old and your strength is gone and your thinking is not clear and your sleep is not restful. And so verse 6 says, remember him before the silver cord is snapped and the golden bowl is crushed, the pitcher by the spring is broken, and the wheel of the cistern is crushed. Remember him before the day comes where you can't serve in the way that you want to. Remember him now. I want to draw 4 quick lessons in the time that we have left, and we do have just a few minutes. The first thing that I want you to think of is that you should obey your parents. Now, I know as you are a young adult and you are making preparations, that listening to your parents is maybe one of the most challenging things. But I want you to consider something. In Luke chapter 2, Jesus gets left behind in the temple, and he's talking with the religious leaders, and the religious leaders are impressed with him as he is talking to them and as he's asking questions. And Joseph and Mary seem to come and be kind of critical of him. Why would you do this? He says, you should have known I would be in my father's house. I'd be about my father's business. And so he goes back with them. They didn't understand what he had spoken to them, verse 50 of Luke 2 says. But verse 51 says, and he went down with them and came to Nazareth, and he continued in subjection to them. And his mother was treasuring all these things in her heart. I know what it's like to feel like that you know more than mom and dad. But Jesus definitely knew more than mom and dad. And he was in subjection to them from 12 years old and on. He advanced in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and men. Why was Jesus in subjection to Joseph and Mary? Because they were mom and dad. And Jesus recognized that they had a responsibility and an authority over him, that despite the fact that he was God in the flesh, he subjected himself to them. Now, I don't know how much you know in comparison with mom and dad, but you don't know more than Jesus knew more than mom and dad. Paul's reason for why children should obey their parents was because this is right. That it was the first commandment with promise, and that we should honor our father and mother. Jesus teaches back in Matthew chapter 15 that honor for father and mother doesn't stop when you get old enough. That honor for father and mother goes all the way to the end. Now, there is a sense in which one day you will leave and you will cleave and you will no longer be in your mother or your father's household, and you will have your own household and you will have your own responsibilities. But in Matthew chapter 15, Jesus says that in failing to look after their parents, they were not keeping the commandments to honor their father and mother. Think about that. He's saying the Pharisees that are grown men are not honoring their father and mother, which I think says something to us when we are teenagers or in our early 20s about the real need to honor father and mother. So this would be my encouragement in that. If Jesus subjects himself to mom and dad, and if Ephesians 6, if Paul says, children, obey your parents, and Jesus says, honor your parents all the way to the end, then don't make them be the one to have to lay the information on you. Seek their wisdom. Seek their counsel. Ask them about the relationship you're in. And ask them about the jobs that you're thinking about. And ask them about the commitments that you're making. And mom and dad, speak truth and wisdom into it. And if you don't have somebody that you can trust, then look for those who can be good examples, as Paul was for Timothy. What a dishonor, what a disaster dishonoring your parents can be. Think about the prodigal who goes to his father and says, give me my inheritance. So this is a young man, but old enough to kind of live out on his own. But how does he do that? He makes a mess of it. He sows his wild oats, and then he doesn't have any oats to eat. He doesn't have anything to eat. And he has to go back to dad and say, Dad, it would be better to be a slave in your house than to be where I was. Of course, the father welcomes him home. But I don't think he gets the same inheritance. I don't think he gets the same share of what he was hoping for, just from a practical perspective. Of course, the spiritual point is that everybody's welcome home. But it's impossible for us to appreciate how devastating that dishonor would be down the road. So, listen to mom and dad and commit to discipline. Use right now as the time to make the decision that I'm going to take up my cross and I'm going to follow Jesus. I'm going to seek first the kingdom of God, and I'm going to discipline my body, and I'm going to train myself for godliness right now while I'm a young person, so that I develop those habits down the road. Listen to wisdom now. In Proverbs 1 and 2, so the same man Solomon is writing in those Proverbs. And as Jake read for us about thinking about wisdom and crying out for it, and you know the kinds of things that Solomon will talk about with regards to wisdom, especially to his son, to young men. He will say, watch out for the women. Watch out for the desire for wealth. Watch out for the groups of friends who try to take you down this or that road. Those are the same warnings you need. So develop wisdom now. And ultimately prepare for the judgment. Because God will bring everything into judgment. And every secret thing. Whether it is good or whether it is evil. So Ronald Reagan, in 1994, made a speech in November. He was 83 years old, and he was announcing, along with his wife Nancy, that he had Alzheimer's. Now, if you're a really young person, you don't remember that speech, but some of you in here will. And he made that speech talking about the diagnosis that he had with Alzheimer's. And as he began to close, he said, "I now begin the journey that will lead me into the sunset of my life." We are all starting the journey that will lead us into the sunset of our life. In fact, you know when you started the journey that will lead you to the sunset of your life? The day you were born. And if you are a young person, you may have more years than Mr. Reagan had ahead of him, but you are on the journey that will lead you to the sunset of your life. Young or old, that is where we are all headed. So remember your Creator. Remember your Creator. Thank you for your kind attention. In just a moment, we're going to sing a song intended to encourage anyone here who has not lived in faithful service to the Lord to give their lives over to our King, Jesus Christ. To let Him be the one who directs our ways and our steps, our thoughts and our words, and shapes us to be more like Him through whatever circumstances we have to deal with. If you want to be more like Jesus, if you want to be glorified with Him in the end, if you want to be around the Father's throne with the Lamb forever and ever, then now will be a wonderful time. It's the right time, because it's the time you have right now to remember your Creator, give your life to the King of Kings. Won't you come while we stand?
Thanks for watching. If you found this video to be beneficial, please follow us on Facebook or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Feel free to share it with others that you feel like may benefit from it. If you need to contact us, please contact